Hello, everyone. I think people are still coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. On behalf of my colleagues at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, also known as SIMS, I'm delighted to welcome you all here. My name is Dot Porter, and I'm the SIMS Curator of Digital Humanities. I'm joined today by my colleagues Nick Herman, the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator of Manuscripts, and Lynn Ransom, the SIMS Curator of Programs and the organizer of the online lecture series. If you are interested in finding out more about SIMS events and programs, please visit our website, schoenberginstitute.org. A few upcoming things you should be aware of include our next online lecture, which is scheduled for March 22nd and will be presented by our own Nick Herman and his collaborator, Barbara Williams-Ellertson. That's Basira, Books as Symbols in Renaissance Art, a new digital resource for book history. And it will present an introduction to and overview of Basira, a powerful web-based open access database of descriptions of books and other textual documents in the figurative arts between approximately 1300 to 1600 CE. It's a database of images of books that appear in other pieces of art, basically. It's very cool. We've also been planning the next the next Lawrence J. Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscript Studies in the Digital Age, which will be held November 21st through the 23rd, and will feature Lisa Fagan Davis as the keynote speaker. The theme of this year's symposium is circulation, which takes the notion of circulation as a starting point for investigating not just the movement of manuscripts from the moment of production to the present day, but also the mechanisms driving their movements, from the intellectual currents of medieval culture to methods of collection and distribution that created demand and instigated movement across time and geographies. I also want to mention that I will have an exhibit open at the same time on the movement of books, focusing on their physical movement. And so it's very exciting to have those two things happening at the same time. Registration isn't open yet for either of these events, but if you want to make sure you don't miss them, you should consider signing up for our newsletter. Lynn will be posting links in the chat that you can peruse at your leisure. Today's lecture, presented by Dr. Marianna Shreve Simpson, is the first online lecture of 2024. Many of you know that this series started during the pandemic as a means to bring scholars and students around the world to our virtual table to share and discuss current research and projects in the field of global manuscript studies at a time when gathering in person was impossible. We're pleased this fully online program still seems to be serving this need, bringing geographically and methodologically diverse audiences together in this virtual space. All of the lectures have been recorded and are available on the SIMS YouTube channel to view anytime. Before I introduce our speaker, I do have a few housekeeping items to share. First, we will be recording this presentation and we'll be posting the video to the Schoenberg Institute's YouTube channel sometime in the next few months. We will announce this on social media, so please do follow up and share widely once it is up. We'll also, of course, be announcing it on our mailing list. If you join that, you'll get that note. My colleagues and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. If you have questions along the way, please go ahead and type them in, and at the end of the lecture, we will pass those questions along to our speaker. It is now with great pleasure that I introduce today's speaker, Dr. Marianna Shreve Simpson. Her career spans decades of dedicated research, teaching, and curatorial work, and she is a leading authority in the study of medieval and early modern Islamic art, particularly Persian illustrated manuscripts. Following her undergraduate degree from Penn and a PhD from Harvard, Shreve's career path wound from the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art through the Freer Gallery of Art and Arthur M. Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian Institution, to the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Curator of Islamic Art at the Walters Art Gallery. She has also served as a consultant for the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and the Manuscripts of the Muslim World Digitization Project. As president of the Historians of Islamic Art Association from 2011 to 2013, as guest curator at the Princeton University Art Museum, and last but not least, as a visiting scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, where she is currently teaching a graduate seminar on the manuscript arts of the Islamic world. Shreve also co-teaches Introduction to Islamic Manuscripts for Rare Book School, which I had the pleasure of attending last summer. So I can say with authority that she's an incredibly knowledgeable and generous teacher on top of everything else. Next year, Shreve will be presenting the prestigious Yarshater Lectures at the University of London, a series which is, quoting from the description, to be delivered by a distinguished, accomplished senior scholar of Persian art. Shreve has published several books focused on Persian manuscripts, and today she'll be talking about one of ours, LJS 278. This talk is also a preview of an annotation forthcoming in the Sims Journal Manuscript Studies. Shreve, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Stage is mine. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, Dot. And Lynn, if we could start with my slides, please. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this very important series. I've been so impressed with how it's evolved in the last few years. In any event, a perennial challenge for specialists in illustrated Islamic manuscripts, whether they're Arabic, Persian, Turkish, or Indian, is how to deal with codices that have been disbound, dismembered, and dispersed, usually with the text block in one place, typically an institutional collection like a museum or library, and the detached illustration scattered in many other places. The common art historical impulse, and I'm sure this is true in studies of illuminated European manuscripts as well, the common impulse is to track down the far-flung folios, reunite them virtually, if not physically, with their parent manuscript, and reconstruct their collation, thereby bringing order to disorder and enabling research on issues such as the work's original production, materiality and codicology, its textual particularities, pictorial program, text-image relations, and the like. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Lynn. Thank you. Among the best examples of this Islamic art history practice is a richly illustrated Arabic copy of Dioscorides' De Materia Medica, or to give its Arabic name, the Hawas al-Ashar, dated 612 of the Hijra, corresponding to 1224 of the Common Era, and belonging to the Suleymaniye Library in Istanbul. Sometime in the early 20th century, a few dozen folios were removed from the manuscript and eventually ended up in public and private holdings worldwide, including in the United States. While the history and art history of this 13th century Arabic manuscript were well known to me, especially since several of the illustrated folios like these are housed at institutions where I happen to have studied or worked over the years, the De Materia Medica was the last thing on my mind in 2022 when Dot Porter invited me to be a guest host of her ongoing Coffee with a Codex series, which, as many of you know, features manuscripts belonging to Penn's collections. And the invitation came with the specific request that I present an illustrated Dioscorides manuscript. Next, please. Next slide, please. This is in the Schoenberg collection, shelf mark LJS 278. It's entitled the Kitab-i Hashayish. It's written in Persian and it was cataloged as coming from late 16th century India. So I said sure to the invitation without having any idea of what I was getting into. Because although Dot series is delightfully informal, and although I had leafed through the Penn manuscript once or twice and browsed the digital surrogates and metadata so expertly prepared by Dr. Kelly Tuttle for the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project, I basically knew nothing of significance. That is to say, I knew nothing worth saying, worth talking about LJS 278 or its 300 plus illustrations. So next, please. So I took a longer and closer look at the book itself, delved more deeply into the invaluable database, talked about it for a half an hour on Coffee with a Codex, Dot's program, fielded a few questions, and in the process got totally hooked on trying to figure out more about its textuality and especially its materiality, production, and history. So today's presentation is what resulted from essentially what amounts to a fixation with something very far removed from my previous art historical interest and efforts. My first task was to get up to speed on the textual history and transmission of the botanical cum pharmaceutical handbook that is De Materia Medica. As many of you doubtless know, it is a long and complicated story, beginning with its compilation by the Greek physician and botanist Pedanius Dioscorides, circa 50 to 70 of the Common Era. And here I should confess, basically, that I was telling a art historian friend about this work some months ago. She happens to be Greek, and I kept talking about Dioscorides. She kept looking at me more and more puzzled, finally wrote it out, and then she burst into hysterics because apparently I'm totally mispronouncing the author's Greek name. So this talk today comes with my apologies for that mispronunciation. Anyway, next slide, please. The text, Dioscorides' text, consists of 5 books or discourses, which describes hundreds of herbs and plants, as well as other natural substances such as animals and minerals, and discusses their medicinal and therapeutic uses. From the original Greek, Dioscorides' Pharmacopoeia was rendered into Syriac in 9th century Baghdad by the preeminent translator Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and then into Arabic by Esteban ibn Basil under Hunayn's supervision. As it happens, next slide, please. The Penn manuscript refers directly to this polylingual chain of textual transmission in an inscription on the book's topmost folio at the end of Discourse 2, just beneath the depictions of the greater and lesser orpine plant. And may I remind you that Persian, like Arabic, reads from right to left, and the orpine is a herbaceous succulent also known as sedum. So here's the inscription. Thus ends the second discourse of the book as conveyed by Hunayn ibn Ishaq from the book of Dioscorides from the Greek language to Syriac. Next slide, please. Another illustrated and intact copy of the Arabic text, said to date from the 3rd quarter of the 12th to the early 13th century, belongs to the shrine of the Imam Reza in Mashhad, Iran, which received it in 1608 as a pious donation from Shah Abbas I, the then ruler of Iran's Safavid dynasty. Notwithstanding its importance, this manuscript has never been fully published, although it has occasionally been exhibited, including in New York and Boston in 1949 and 50. And these black and white photos that I'm able to show you are courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I'm indebted to the Met's image archivist, Terry Aderman, and to senior research assistant Courtney Stewart for locating and printing the negatives. Before endowing this volume to the Mashhad Shrine, Shah Abbas is believed to have commissioned a Persian version or a Persian translation of the Arabic text from a translator named Riyafuddin Muhammad Rezavi, about whom little seems to be known. Although this royal volume no longer seems to have survived, 2 illustrated copies of the Persian translation are known. Next slide, please. One is dated 1645 in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. That's on the right. And I'd like to thank my colleague Moya Carey, who's the curator of the library's Islamic collection, for a set of digital images of the manuscript's illustrated folios, including the colophon where the translator's name appears. The other illustrated Kitab-i Hashayish is dated 1658 on the left and belongs to the Institute of Oriental Studies in St. Petersburg. It was exhibited in Europe and the US 30 years ago, and a dozen or so of its illustrated folios are reproduced in the exhibition catalog, and those reproductions are the source of the images I can show you today. Next, please. Not being a textual scholar, much less an expert on Dioscorides, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but on the basis of a random but not inconsequential selection of line by line, word by word comparisons, I can report with confidence that the Penn manuscript contains the same Persian text as the 1645 Codex in Dublin and the 1651 58 one in St. Petersburg. So this makes it the third extant exemplar of the Kitab-i Hashayish as translated by Riyazuddin Muhammad Rezavi. And just to give you an example of how I arrived at this conclusion of textual kinship, here are shared folios from the first Dioscorides discourse with discussions and representations of the iris and white garden lily. Although the painting styles differ, and it's something I'll talk about in a bit, the overall plant iconography is similar, and I'll trust you'll take my word that the Persian text on these folios is identical. And just to explain a bit further, in all three manuscripts, the red lemma are given in Arabic or Arabicized transliterations from the Greek, and the plant descriptions and their medicinal and pharmaceutical properties are in Persian. Next slide, please. By now, you will have noticed that the folios in the Schoenberg manuscript, the Penn manuscript, are not in the same shape as those in the other two volumes. Quite simply, in terms of condition, our manuscript is a wreck. And that's not the proper curatorial or preservation term, but it's the sad truth. Already by the time the manuscript was acquired by Lawrence Schoenberg, who then gave it to Penn, the volume had been recognized as an incomplete, that is, fragmentary copy of the Persian Dioscorides. Next slide, please. In addition, it then lacked and still lacks a cover, and although its text block once had been bound, as evidenced by the stitching stations visible on the central fold of many of the leaves, it now consists of a stack of 172 loose leaves, including some bifolios, that is conjugate leaves like this one, and many single folios. Next, please. So here's the stack. An even greater challenge in studying this rare copy of the Kitab-i Hashayish is that its folios are not in correct textual order. At some point prior to Mr. Schoenberg's acquisition of the manuscript, which was in 1998, as I think I've already said, many of the leaves were paginated in a small library hand and pencil and numbered 1 to 355. Next, please. So in principle, each folio has two numbers, one for its recto and one for its verso. And I say in principle, but not in practice, because some pages were skipped during the numbering process and some numbers were repeated. Although these numbers are helpful for collection inventory purposes and have served as the initial basis for the individual recto and verso listings in the OPEN digital database, they do not correspond at all to what would or should have been the folio's original textual order. Next, please. Furthermore, while each bifolio opening has text continuing across its facing sides, as you can see, the text itself is rarely sequential, since two conjugate folios would have been nested with other bifolios as part of the original system of choirs or gatherings, that is, its collation. In short, the text block of LJS 278 is in total disorder as a copy of the Kitab-i Hashayish. It's hence the title of my talk today and of the forthcoming annotation in manuscript studies. It's almost as if the whole thing had been taken apart and flung up in the air. May I have the next slide, please? I have a vision of someone tripping at the top of a steep staircase like this, and then the leaves gathered up and reassembled at random, after which they were numbered in an effort to keep them straight. Next, please. But even the numbering was done sort of sporadically, possibly with a lot of time off from the task and many tea breaks in between, and possibly by more than one hand. But notwithstanding this general disarray, I have been able to reconstruct a significant part of the folio's original textual sequence for Dioscorides, for discourses 1 through 4, and I'll explain how I did this in a moment, and to ascertain that the manuscript's codicological structure would have been composed of choirs with 10 leaves, that is, of quinions, as commonly found in Islamic manuscripts. Next, please. And here's a collation that Dot Porter kindly did to illustrate the point of the structure of the manuscript. Next, please. As for other aspects of its codicology, I'm just going to give you a brief rundown, and I'm going to skip certain details in the interest of time. The manuscript substrate consists of quite coarse and seemingly unpolished handmade paper with discernible laid lines that ranges in tone from dark cream to beige or buff. The paper is firm, but not so thick as to preclude the shadow of illustrations on one side of a folio being visible on the other, as you can see on the right image. As is typical of Persian manuscripts of the early modern period, the written surface is delineated by a series of rulings in red and black, and these colors have faded over the centuries, with generous margins at the top, bottom, and outer side of each folio. And again, these proportions are typical for Islamicate manuscripts. The written surface contains a maximum of 15 text lines, but this count is variable, as in many cases, the size and number of illustrations takes precedent over regularity in the number of text lines, and even determines the actual shape of the written surface, as we'll see in a moment. At least the width of the written surface is consistent at 17.5 centimeters, but the overall dimensions, because of the condition of the folios, is irregular with a lot of frayed edges. But you see the average dimension, the average overall dimensions, as appears on the screen, makes this actually quite a large manuscript. It's cataloged as oversized, and it's also a little cumbersome to handle. Next, please. The Kitab-i, Kitab-i Hashayish text is written in a black cursive script known as Nastaliq, the classic Persian calligraphic style. Although Nastaliq can be very fluid and elegant, the letter formations in the Penn manuscript are irregular, the placement of the words cramped, and the ink uneven, contributing to paleographic difficulties. The overall effect is of a hastily executed transcription with legibility less than a priority, and perhaps by someone who is not a well-trained or professional scribe. In short, the lines of text reflect hurried handwriting rather than controlled calligraphy. Throughout the manuscript, the lemma, as well as section headings and other rubrics, are in a red ink in a round script called Naskh, generally regarded as a copyist's hand and a bit more legible to read. Next, please. As for the manuscript's production, and again, I am summarizing here, the centuries-old tradition of Islamicate manuscript illustration was, first, for the text to be transcribed with spaces left for images, and then the leaves passed on to a painter for illumination and illustration. That at least a portion of LJS 278, specifically Discourse 4, involved this normative practice is demonstrated by leaves such as this bifolio about the bindweed plant, containing either blank spaces for images or sketchy outlines of images above and below lines of ruled text. And these also tell us that the ruling was done before the illustration. Next, please. On the other hand, many of the manuscript's folios, notably in Discourses 1, 2, and 3, were evidently executed in the reverse process. That is, with the plants painted first and the text written around them, and in some cases between the images. This is most obvious where the plants are oriented either on the diagonal or on the horizontal, so sideways rather than vertically, as you can see on the left of the screen, folio 88 with images of parsley. More radical scribal modification was required for other folios, for instance, folios 57 and 90, where all the plants were painted in the margins. Similarly, on folio 298, the placement and spreading branches of the plants, consisting of spotted dead nettle and 2 species of corncockle, left room for only 3 lines of text, with lines 1 and 2 indented out of necessity. And here on folio 18, perhaps you can tell that the scribe wrote over the roots of the horizontal henna plant instead of working around them. So what does all this tell us about the manuscript's production? To fully answer that, it is necessary to consider the manuscript's painting styles. But before we do that, I want to share how it is that I determined that the top plant on folio 298 is a spotted dead nettle, and the ones below are two species of corn cockle, and that on folio 18 at the bottom we have at the depiction of henna. Well, that one was actually pretty easy because there's a legend, a Persian legend next to the plant, as well as the two plants above. But I am not a botanist or a paleographer, and definitely not equipped linguistically to follow the Persian text of the Kitab-i Hashayish, not to mention the challenge of actually deciphering the hasty hand of the Penn manuscript. So what I needed from the get-go was a printed edition of the Kitab-i Hashayish, and what I believe is common paleographic practice, and one that I myself had followed in the past when studying illustrated manuscripts of medieval Persian poetry. Unfortunately, there seems to be no printed edition of Rezavi's Kitab-i Hashayish. Fortunately, I was able to determine, as previously mentioned, that the Persian text of LJS 278 is the same as the volume in Dublin, and I had received very clear digital images of its illustrated openings. Next, please. Also fortuitously, the Dublin manuscript is written in a very neat and clear hand, quite easy to read, especially its red lemma, and its depictions of plants and other substances are also carefully rendered. So I did the art historical thing, and I set out to match the lemma inscriptions and images in the seemingly orderly Chester Beatty Codex with the disordered and poorly written leaves of the Penn book. But there was a complication in these matchups because the Dublin manuscript also has never been fully studied nor published, and the available digital images do not include many text pages. So there are gaps in the digital corpus, and the images do not comprise a true facsimile. That's not a complaint. Any colleagues in Dublin are listening? That's not a complaint, it's just an explanation. So I still needed a complete textual guide in order to understand the scientific iconography and give recognizable names to the plants and animals in the Dublin and Philadelphia manuscripts. For that guide or control, I turned to an intact Arabic copy. Next, please. An Arabic copy in the New York Public Library. The shelf mark is Spencer Persian MS-39. It's actually in Arabic, not in Persian. It was copied and illustrated in 1889 to 90 for Nasruddin Shah, ruler of Iran's Qajar dynasty. The New York manuscript was published in scrupulous detail with its 961 images identified in their Greek, Arabic, and English forms in a 1992 catalog of the library's Islamic manuscripts. Not surprisingly, that publication reproduced only a small selection of the manuscript's folios, but happily the whole codex has now been digitized. It's now available online. Next, please. The frosting on the cake here is that this 19th century illustrated Arabic manuscript made for a Qajar Shah of Iran is a copy of the 12th or 13th century illustrated Arabic manuscript owned by the Safavid Shah of Iran, who had the text translated into Persian before donating it to the shrine in Mashhad. Thus, the textual and iconographic Arabic and Persian dots connect over the centuries, or so I had supposed. But of course, there's never a straight line between A and B. In the process of comparing the illustrated folios in the Dublin Persian manuscript with those in the New York Arabic manuscript, I realized that the two were not totally in sync, and that certain sections of the Dublin manuscript were missing and out of textual order. So I dropped the Persian Dublin manuscript and took up the Arabic New York one as my main comparanda for LJS 278. Next, please. All this is by way of saying that my reconstruction of Penn's Persian manuscript is dependent upon the pictorial and iconographic sequence of the 19th century Arabic manuscript in New York, which in turn, and to reiterate, is a copy of the 12th or 13th century Arabic codex in Mashhad, which, to reiterate, was the textual source for the Persian codices in Dublin and St. Petersburg. I'm sure there's a Venn diagram here if I only knew how to do it. Using this complicated triangulation, I have so far been able to reconstruct the order of all but 30 or so folios in LJS 278 and hope to be able to finish the job in due course. Since part of the challenge is deciphering our scribes' hasty handwriting, it may be that a handwritten text recognition program like eScriptorium, as discussed by Peter Stokes in his SIMS talk this past December, could be applied to this. Next, please. In any event, in the process of reconstructing LJS 278, I learned of 4 folios that once had belonged to the Penn manuscript before its acquisition by Lawrence Schoenberg, and I was able to identify their place in the manuscript's original sequence. So here at the top of the screen are the front and back sides of one bifolio in Washington, acquired by the Smithsonian's Freer Gallery of Art in the same year that Mr. Schoenberg purchased the 172 leaves now at Penn. It depicts blight, high mallow, hollyhock, wild carrot, and possibly rocket and dodder, and comes between the LJS illustrated folio of goat's beard, Star of Bethlehem, and truffles. Those are those round things at the bottom on the left of the screen. These are all from Dioscorides Discourse 2. Next, please. Another detached folio is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, recently accessioned, as part of the renowned Howard Hodgkin collection and currently on view in a special Met exhibition. Over the years, it has been published as representing bamboo, but my reconstruction of LJS 278 places it in Discourse 1 and identifies the plants as 5 varieties of reed. More significantly, perhaps, the addition to the reconstruction of the detached folios in Washington and New York, along with 2 others in Oxford and Singapore, brings the total number of reported leaves to 176, exactly the number reported in 1982 when the fragmentary Kitab-i Hashayish was exhibited in a London gallery. Well, that was kind of a long-winded explanation for my reconstruction of LJS 278. Discussion of the manuscript's paintings is much more straightforward. The illustrations were all painted directly on the manuscript paper, that is without any background or framing lines, and rendered in 2 styles, which I have dubbed robust and delicate. The first was used for images in Discourses 1, 2, and 3, and the second for those in Discourse 4. Next, please. The trees, plants, and animals in the robust style appear to have been first sketched in gray and then outlined in bold contours. Tree trunks, stems, branches, and roots are painted in strong shades of brown, gray, and sometimes dark red, and with dabs of darker color to indicate texture, for instance, on the bark of the olive and oak trees, which you see here. Leaves are often outlined in red and painted in 2 shades of green, with either a contrasting green, yellow, or white pigment used to delineate leaves and ribs. Fruit and buds are similarly varied, depending on the species and on the textual description. Next, please. Likewise, the bulbs of certain plants, such as the leek, onion, and garlic, seen here, are colored in dark red, gray, and white. The overall rendering of the plant matter gives the impression of volume, movement, and growth, as if, for instance, leaves were rustling in the wind and roots were spreading out underground. By contrast, and with a few exceptions, next please, the animals, including fish and birds, which are all in Discourse 2, appear inert and tend to be in uniform shades of brown and gray, with sometimes little striations to indicate feathers and gills. And that creature in the boar-like creature or pig, the middle of the right-hand image with a fish inside that's a sea gudgeon inside a pig. And apparently when it's roasted slowly, it provides an anecdote for snake and dog bites. Thank you to Dioscorides. Next, please. The delicate style plants in Discourse 4 lack contours and have thin, spindly stems, branches, blossoms, and roots. Their palette of green, brown, and yellow is generally paler than the colors in the robust style, and the green leaves often have indistinct or no veins or ribs. Interestingly, the folios from Discourse 4 include those where spaces for images have been left blank, as well as plants that have only been lightly sketched in. Next, please. Furthermore, there are delicate style images, as on the right, where the leaves have been painted while the stems, blossoms, and roots remain in outline form. All this indicates not only that the manuscript was never completed, but also that the Discourse 4 plants were painted in a particular order, namely with the leaves first. Furthermore, and contrasting the images rendered in the delicate style and those in the robust, next slide, please. It seems that they were the work of totally different hands. In short, more than one artist was responsible for the manuscript's illustration. The two distinct styles also point to the possibility that LJS 278 was produced in separate stages, that is, with a hiatus before Discourse 4. Next, please. And now to turn to the most vexing part of LJS's story, its origin. As I mentioned a moment ago, the manuscript was exhibited in a London gallery in 1982. The exhibit catalog dates the manuscript to the month of Muharram in the year 1004, corresponding to September 1595, and gives its probable place of origin as the Sultanate of Bijapur in the Deccan, a region in southwest India. This attribution was credited to Simon Digby, an English specialist in pre-Mughal Indian painting, who gave his opinion, and here I'm quoting from the catalog, in a verbal communication for reasons of language and pictorial style. While the place of origin of the Deccan during the Sultanate of Bijapur, which from 1490 to 1687 was ruled by the Muslim Adil Shahi dynasty, was doubtless based on Digby's considerable art historical expertise and connoisseurship, the very specific date of September 1595 suggests information derived from the manuscript's colophon. My study to date of LJS 278 and its detached leaves has yet to reveal a colophon or any other equivalent documentation. Next, please. Be that as it may, Digby's attribution for the manuscript's place of origin was regularly repeated in exhibition catalogs over the years, such as this one, albeit with reference to 3 of the dispersed leaves rather than to LJS 278 itself, and with the date sometimes qualified as circa 1595. This attribution, which as far as I can tell, Digby himself never published, was also carried over into the Schoenberg collection dossier that accompanied the Persian manuscript's gift to Penn and incorporated into the initial online metadata. The extensive catalog entry for the important intact Arabic manuscript of Dioscorides in the New York Public Library, that's the manuscript that was my control for the reconstruction of LJS 278, cites David James, former keeper at Dublin's Chester Beatty Library, as proposing that the date of the fragmentary manuscript now at Penn should be read as 1054, that is 1645, implying that there was something like a colophon to read. As you may recall, 1645 is the date of the Kitab-i Hashayish belonging to the Chester Beatty. David James himself never published this adjusted date, but it too has passed into the literature. Sadly, both Digby and James are deceased, so there's no chance for checking the basis of their attribution. But one thing is clear: no evidence, either documentary or otherwise, has emerged to substantiate Digby's original attribution of 1595 or James's subsequent rereading of 1645 for Penn's Kitab-i Hashayish. As for the Bijapur in the Deccan as a place of origin, next slide, please. This is the, sorry, skipped over this. This is to remind us of the Dublin manuscript dated 1645. And next, please. As for the Bijapur and the Deccan as a place of origin, my colleagues who work on early modern Indian and specifically Deccani and Adil Shahi illustrated manuscripts agree that there's nothing within that extensive painting corpus that seems stylistically comparable to the images in LJS 278. So the where and when of the production of our Kitab-i Hashayish remains problematic. One iconographic particularity, however, may shed some light on how it was produced. Next, please. This image in Discourse 1 of LJS 278, the manuscript's only figural illustration, represents two men, one kneeling, one standing, as you see, using iron nails resembling pointed sticks to tap a balsam tree and holding bowls to collect the sap. Next, please. The same scene to the same text appears in the Chester Beatty manuscript of 1645, but there is a striking stylistic difference between the two. The men in the Dublin manuscript on your left are svelte and clean-shaven and wear the kind of loose, almost floppy turbans and long robes buttoned down the front and tied with sashes at the waist, typical of male figures in late 16th and early 17th century Safavid painting. The Philadelphia figures, admittedly rather abraded, are less than svelte, although they're not exactly stocky, and they wear short robes. The man kneeling to the far side of the tree also has a shawl draped over his legs and across his right arm. Both figures have long curling hair, and beards and gold discs like halos that set off their heads from the background. And next, please. The disc or halo effect is a common feature of figural representation in medieval Arabic manuscripts, as in the 1224 Dioscorides scene we saw at the beginning of my talk. And nearby in the, next please. Yep. Nearby in the Penn manuscript, there's a double-handled vessel, presumably at the ready to store the sap. The treatment of this little vignette around the balsam tree in LJS 278, including the men's appearance, clothing, halos, gold bowls, and double-handled ewer, is identical to that found in the 12th or 13th century Arabic copy of the Dioscorides manuscript, which is already, as I've already mentioned, has been in Mashhad, Iran since 1608, and which has been identified as the textual source for the Persian translation of the Kitab-i Hashayish. Whereas the Chester Beatty illustration adopts its tree harvesters to conform to Safavid pictorial style and fashion and omits the storage vessel, the LJS image is faithful to the medieval prototype in every respect. This suggests, although certainly does not prove, that LJS 278 may be a copy, either direct or more likely at a remove after the Mashhad manuscript, and that it may have originated in 17th century Iran rather than late 16th century India, as formally attributed. Also telling in this regard is that the very same balsam tree vignette, next slide please, minus the men's halos, appears in another Arabic Dioscorides manuscript dated 1629, commissioned by the then governor of Mashhad named Abul Fath Manuchir Khan. Mashhad was then an important center for manuscript production, and the Arabic text of the Dioscorides manuscript in Mashhad was the model for the governor's copy, also in Arabic, of 1629. So this could be another instance of manuscript triangulation. Next, please. There are other suggestive comparisons. Here's one of them between the medieval Arabic manuscript in Mashhad and the early modern manuscript in Philadelphia in terms of format, iconography, and style of representation in discourses 1, 2, and 3. Although the figural balsam scene is the most striking of the comparisons. Next, please. Interestingly, however, the illustrations of the rough bindweed plant in the Mashhad and Penn manuscripts and in the 19th century copy of the Mashhad manuscript, that's the one in New York, are quite dissimilar. Given that this plant appears in Discourse 4, the disparity may be yet another indication of a shift or break, or perhaps even a change of model in the production of LJS 278. And now a brief coda, since I had hinted at provenance in the abstract for this talk. In discussing the manuscript's origins a moment ago, I mentioned that it was Simon Digby's expertise via verbal communication cited in the catalog of the 1982 exhibition in London that attributed our manuscript to the Deccan in September of 95, excuse me. Although that catalog does not identify the manuscript's owner, last year the catalog's author reported to me via personal communication, so you'll have to take my word for it, that in 1982, the manuscript was owned by Simon Digby. Next, please. After Simon Digby's death in 2010, the estate executors discovered a bifolio from the Kitab-i Hashayish among his effects and donated it in his memory to Oxford University's Ashmolean Museum, where Digby had served for a time as a curator. And what we see here are two sides of this bifolio. In a recent message to the Schoenberg Institute at Penn, the London concern from which Lawrence Schoenberg purchased his 172 Dioscorides folios in 1998 revealed that it had bought the manuscript from Simon Digby in 1997. So far, I haven't been able to verify when and where Digby himself acquired the manuscript. But this is definitely a case where art history, the art market, and manuscript collecting converge. And one can imagine how advantageous it would have been to attribute the manuscript's production, that is, attributing it to 1595, to the reign of the Shah of Iran, who commissioned the Materia Medica's Persian translation and who donated the Arabic source manuscript for that translation to the Holy Shrine in Mashhad in 1608. Next, please. So all manuscripts have their lives and afterlives. Those of LJS 278 are particularly complicated, even fraught. Further research, perhaps by some among you here, should be able to put all the existing leaves back into their proper textual order and to shed light on where this fascinating fragmentary work fits into the venerable illustrated history of De Materia Medica and its latter-day Persian manifestation as a Kitab-i Hashayish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shreve. That was really fantastic. I feel like I know so much more about this manuscript than I did before. So thank you so much. We can take questions now. If folks have questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand and we can call on you. Mitch Frost in the chat says, fantastic, Shreve, what a labor of discovery. Yeah, I have to say I'm a little bit proud that
you were the start of it.
Yes, that I was the start of it. I invited you on and then this happened. Okay, so it looks like we have our first question from Vivek Gupta. Dear Shreve, if Simon Digby had it, he almost certainly acquired it in India. When I looked at the manuscript a while ago, the layout, paleography, and dimensions are very similar to the Deccan Qazwini manuscript, which may have led Simon to make his attribution. But I also understand the close affiliation with the Mashhad manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I never had the pleasure of meeting Simon Digby, but I understand that he spent a lot of time in India. I believe actually he was raised in India, born in India. And so it's very likely that that is indeed where he bought it.
Great. Any other questions?
Shreve, I have a question. It's sort of not knowing necessarily the market in Persian sort of miniatures and how they appear on the market or not. I mean, do you think it's likely that there are more folios that will surface eventually, or has there been enough of a time lag that it seems unlikely to you? I know that's kind of a speculative question, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, if it was possible for the executors of Simon Digby's estate to find a one errant folio in the back of a drawer, as I understand it, then there could indeed be other folios. Part of the reconstruction, of course, identified the gaps in the manuscript, of which there are many. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if other folios and bifolios didn't appear someday. I'm hoping they will. I hope everyone will keep an eye out for them.
Great.
I see Mitch points to the one in Singapore, which
yes, it was the one in Singapore. Yeah, sorry, the one in Singapore was in a private collection in the United States before it went to Singapore, and was published in that private as being part of that private collection.
Yeah, so that's Nick Herman, who was just talking. I don't see you, Nick, in my thing, so I don't know if other people see that that's who was talking. Our colleague Nick. So there are some more questions in the chat. One from Andrew Williams, who says, "Thank you for your presentation. Would comparing LJS 278 with extant Byzantine copies of De Materia Medica provide another level of triangulation that could help restore an original order to the manuscript?"
Yes, I'm sure it would. I hope that somebody else will take that on, but I at least I did make a stab at comparing the leaves in the Penn manuscript with the digitized images for the manuscript that's dated, see if I get this right, I think it's dated 1068, which is in the Leiden University Library. I had actually hoped to see the manuscript when I was there this past fall, but it was on exhibition in Paris, so that didn't work. But I found some similarities and many differences in those two manuscripts. And the question is, what happens in the transmission from the Greek to the Syriac to the Arabic to the Persian?
All right, we have a question from our colleague Jaj Karajikar here at Penn. She says, "Thank you so much for sharing. I adore the Nastaliq script HTR connection you made and the images of the plants as a Venn diagram. Given that the Pothy format is essentially loose leaf format, do you think there is a specific meaning to the ordering of these?" Does that make?
Well, the Penn manuscript is only loose leaf because at one point it was taken apart. It was clearly once bound, and the textual order can be. I can have been able to reconstruct the textual order in comparing it with the Arabic manuscript in New York. So right now the order or disorder, if you will, of the stack of leaves of folios and bifolios is the way Mr. Schoenberg acquired it, I assume, and the way the university then acquired it in, Nick, you remind me of the year, was it 2011 or sometime earlier?
I see Lynn nodding.
Yeah, I mean, they came at different times. The gift was given, I think, in 2011, and then the manuscripts have sort of come in years after that, and years since that. I had a follow-up question, if I may, that I think Melis Tanner also, this is to Andrew Williams' question, if there are earlier Arabic manuscripts of Dioscorides in Iran, India, that may have served as visual models. And I also wanted to, I noticed that with the drapery, there was some kind of like a classicizing element of the treatment of the drapery of those two figures. And if that had more of a Byzantine influence, I guess, or some kind of connection. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yes, definitely. I think that hopefully one of these days the 12th the late 12th or early 13th century manuscript in Mashhad, which I think might have been the model for the Penn one, will be studied, and we'll have a better idea of its stylistic connections with Byzantine manuscripts and with Byzantine prototypes.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
I
like
have a
there's.
comment from.
Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Don.
do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think I got us out of order in the chat.
Yeah. So there's a comment from Moya Carey, who I believe is at Dublin.
Yes. Hello, Moya.
Yeah. So she says, I will do my best to get pair 273 digitized in entirety. Thank you for this excellent research presentation.
Thank you, Moya.
All right. So there's a question from Luana Schaefer asking if there are publications. She sort of directs it to the chat. Does anyone know of publications on illustrated Persian copies of the text? I know only of publications on the Arabic manuscripts. Is there bibliography that you know of, or?
I hope somebody out there knows, has a better answer than I do, because I don't know. There's one article that discusses very thoroughly the Arabic manuscripts in Iranian collections, but that's as far as it goes, as far as I know.
Okay, but if anyone else has citations, I think dropping them in the chat would be great.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a question from Barbara Williams Ellertson, wondering whether the pharmacology of plants' uses have similarities to other medieval medical texts. I'm thinking about Avicenna, but I know very little about this area.
I know less, so I don't have an answer for that question.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of work to be done.
I haven't tried to get into the pharmaceutical content of the text at all. That wasn't really my goal. Okay.
Another question from Vivek Gupta. Shreve, sorry for another point, but there happens to be another copy in the Telangana State Library, so it might be another reason not to completely rule out South Asia. And then he says, thank you again.
All right, Vivek, we'll have to be in touch.
So I think I'm caught up on the chat. If anyone else has questions, we have time. I mean, I have so many ideas about, because as you know, and probably other people listening know, I am very interested in this question of the structure and ordering of pages, and I would love to, now that your annotation is going to be out and you've done the hard work, to actually see about building some kind of virtual reconstruction of the book and putting it in the correct order. Because as you say, like right now you open the box up and it's just like piles of leaves, which are fun to look at, but not very structurally sound. So how would you feel about that if I?
Well, it would be great.
It
would be great to be able to finish reconstructing. There are about 30 folios that whose place I haven't found. I do have, I'm just going to show up. So I don't know what, this may not show up. Will this show on the screen? Yes. A notebook, oh, yeah. thanks to Nick Herman, in which there are printouts of, no, that's not going to work, is it? Anyway, every folio of the manuscript was printed out, and I put them in the order according to the reconstruction. So there's a facsimile in Philadelphia of this, but it includes 30 folios that I haven't been able to locate yet.
Yeah, that's so great. And John Pollock has a question. John.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Shreve. Excuse my voice. Thank you. That was so amazing and brilliant, and a model of scholarship. And I am really one of the ignorant sideline here, except to have watched you labor with the pile in the reading room with sometimes joy and sometimes horror, I think, depending on the day. But I wondered if you could say a little more as an art historian about what you identify as, I'm forgetting the terms you used for the two artists. Is that fair? In the manuscript that we do have, the radical change of drawing in discourse 4, I guess. The simple style. You used two terms to characterize the
robust
art.
and delicate. Yeah,
that's it. Robust and delicate. I love those terms. Is there a way to say more? I mean, I completely see what you're talking about. And it's convincing, but could one go further in analyzing these for time period, for style, for, I don't know, any other clues to maker, artistry, anything that you think? Where does one go next with that observation? Thank you.
Well, I think that a closer comparison with the illustrations, the images in the Chester Beatty copy would where in fact there are at least two artist names appear. So maybe we can start to make some closer comparisons. I think that these, in my experience with Persian manuscripts of the late 16th and early 17th century, say the ones in the LJS 278 sort of fall outside the norm. But maybe that's because of what they actually represent, which is the plants. And I see now that Moya has put a comment in the chat about the Dublin manuscript also follows two separate modes of painting. So then maybe we're again talking about where these artists drew, what were their sources, what were they copying, what were their sources of inspiration. But I'll have to spend more time thinking about that.
I could also add that your talk is a brilliant lesson in cautionary tales about following bibliographic precedent and the dangers of repeating what someone else has said in a catalog or a catalog record, as of course we necessarily do, but
yes,
very much a cautionary tale there.
I'd be curious to know if the two modes of painting in the Dublin manuscript follow the same pattern as the Philadelphia. Like, are the differences in the same discourses, right? If I'm remembering.
Yeah, that's what it seems in Philadelphia, that it's discourse 1, 2, and 3 are in what I call the robust style, and discourse 4 is in the much simpler, delicate style. And what I think I mentioned that I realized that there are some sections of the Dublin manuscript that are actually out of textual order. So in order to figure out if there's a break between, say, discourse 3 and 4 and the Dublin manuscript, one would have to reorganize those images to put them back in their proper textual order. And that hasn't happened yet.
And Moya responded in the text that she thinks that they are, and that she can't join the conversation properly because her signal is bad. But that's kind of interesting if they're happening at the same.
The they is that between 3 and 4, there's a difference. Is that what?
That's what I'm assuming, but
okay, I'll be in touch.
I think you'll have to have
I'll be in touch with her. I'll be in touch with her.
Yeah. And John Pollock says we need a world Dioscorides project.
Yes.
And Dot's second.
Well, it's also the complication that a lot of these manuscripts aren't published. So the one in Mashhad, the late medieval one in Mashhad, has not been published, and it's in a shrine library, so that's even more complicates access. Then the one dated 1629 is in the Golestan Library in Tehran, Maybe someone there is working on it, but if so, nothing, as far as I know, has appeared in print. I mean, all these things, if the images were all available and the text was all available, we'd have a much clearer way forward, I think. Or the ones that Vivek now has mentioned is in India, which I didn't know about. So I hope somebody might work on that one too.
So I think if there aren't any other questions, thank you very much.